The room smelled like roses they'd sprinkled for a celebration that never came, a sweetness that clung to the air and made my stomach turn. I sat on the edge of a king bed in a silent hotel suite that had been booked for a honeymoon, watching a glass of minibar whiskey sweat into a ring on the nightstand. Outside, the ocean moved with that slow, indifferent rhythm that makes you feel both small and very awake. On the dresser, my clutch lay open like a mouth lipstick, and vows I would never say peeking out in accusation. Someone at the front desk had slipped a congratulatory note under the door. I hadn't opened it. The air conditioner hummed like it was trying to soothe me, but the only sound that mattered lived in my head, a single sentence from 3 days ago that split my life cleanly into before and after. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever had to choose dignity over keeping the peace. If this kind of real family story keeps you company, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. My name is Jennifer, and I was raised by 2 public school teachers in a town where you learned early that paychecks were earned by showing up and telling the truth. I started my company with a second-hand laptop in a studio apartment that echoed when I dropped my keys, spent 5 years coaxing late trucks and grumpy drivers into a choreography that finally turned a profit. By the time Adrian and I met at a Chamber of Commerce mixer, I had 3 small warehouses and a balance sheet that looked sturdy enough to exhale around. He wore confidence like a tailored jacket, asked curious questions, and remembered that my niece's birthday was on a Tuesday. Little things that made the big things feel safe. His family was polished where mine was practical Sunday tablecloths and framed degrees and photos of white linens on charity banquet tables. But I could find my way in a room like that. They said they admired my drive, called me disciplined, and I told myself that meant accepted. We built a life of shared calendars and split responsibilities. His playlists in my kitchen and my coffee in his car. The kind of routine that makes you believe you've stumbled into something ordinary and good. I paid vendors on Fridays. He made dinner reservations. We argued about paint colors and laughed our way out of it. When we got engaged after 3 years, I cried into his shirt and said yes to a ring that sparkled like a promise. Somewhere in there, an adult voice. I trust the part of me that keeps receipts and plans for detours suggested a prenup. Not a weapon, not a wall. Just a simple, you keep yours, I keep mine, we build what's ours, together. Kind of agreement. Adrian didn't say much at first, and I took his silence for comfort the way you do when you're in love and you want to believe the best. On the surface, everything gleamed. We toured a waterfront venue that smelled faintly of lemon oil and old wood, picked a string quartet because his mother said violins set a dignified tone, and ordered a cake that took a full page of notes to describe. My card handled the deposits. I told myself it was easier that way, cleaner books, fewer signatures. He called me practical when I tracked expenses on my phone and kissed my forehead like it was a compliment. At fittings, Greta fussed over napkin folds and lighting, while Hendrik offered to make calls if we needed influence. I said thank you and meant it because a family's ready hands feel like approval, even when you can hear the conditions whispering underneath. If there were hairline cracks, I smoothed a thumb over them and kept moving. A tight look when my attorney emailed back edits a joke about my boardroom voice when I asked for final draft copies, that sharp little pause he took when I reminded him to send his lawyer the latest version. I told myself wedding stress is a language everyone forgets and relearns that the pressure to make something beautiful can turn any of us clumsy. It was easier to trust the life we were building than to tug at a loose thread and watch what unraveled. The Thursday before the ceremony, he stood in our living room beside a stack of papers like he was guarding a small fire. The blinds cut the afternoon into even bands of light, and the steady tick of a wall clock made the moment feel measured and official. He didn't invite me to sit. He didn't ask how my day had gone. He just said the sentence that still hums in the back of my skull, the one that tasted like metal in finality the moment it left his mouth. We need to talk about what you're going to sign. The light through the blinds made thin bars across the living room carpet, and Adrian stood beside the coffee table as if he had been waiting for me to walk in. The stack of papers between us wasn't thick, maybe a quarter of an inch, but the way he placed his hand over them made them feel heavier than steel. His face was calm, but his eyes carried something sharper, as though he had been rehearsing what he was about to say. He didn't ask me to sit down, and he didn't ease into conversation. His first words came with the kind of precision that leaves no space for misunderstanding. "Jennifer," he said, "we need to talk about what you're going to sign." I stood there for a beat, still holding my phone, the faint buzz of an unread email in my palm. My lawyer had already explained that the prenup was simple. Each of us kept what we had, inheritances stayed separate, and what we built together would be shared. Fair, ordinary, the kind of agreement that gave us both protection. I had expected Adrian to ask questions, maybe even push back on a clause or two, but not to glare at it like it was something rotten left on the table. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. He lifted the papers and flicked them with his fingers as though shaking off dust. "This," he said, "is insulting." I felt my chest tighten. "It's standard. Everyone I know with a business has one." Adrian leaned against the couch, folding his arms. His expression carried that quiet superiority I had sometimes noticed when he spoke to waiters or junior colleagues, a look that turned conversation into a performance. "If you trust me, why do you need protection from me?" he asked. "We're about to promise each other forever." I had heard people describe ultimatums as sharp, but in that moment it felt blunt, heavy, designed to crush rather than cut. I chose my words with care. "Adrian, this isn't about trust. It's about being practical. Your lawyer can review it, add changes. That's normal." His response was a laugh, short, bitter, without humor. He tossed the papers onto the table where they slid across the polished wood. "I'm not paying for some lawyer to read this garbage," he said flatly. Then he leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a different document, one that says this prenup is void. You'll do it without your lawyer today. Otherwise, there's no wedding on Sunday." The room seemed to shrink. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything but the clock on the wall. His tuxedo was hanging in the upstairs closet, my dress pressed, and ready, family members already on flights. Yet here he was, 3 days before the ceremony, holding my future like a bargaining chip. "You're asking me to choose between you and everything I've built," I whispered. "I'm giving you a chance," he snapped, "to prove you love me more than your company." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but instead, I stared at the man I thought I knew. The one who used to surprise me with flowers or stay up late helping me sort invoices. Now he was demanding obedience, not partnership. I reminded him that my company was paying for the wedding, the flowers, the chairs, the venue that had sent us a bill so steep I had blinked twice before writing the check. His cheeks flushed red. "This is exactly what I mean," he said. "You always throw money in my face." "It's not throwing," I said softly. "It's reminding. $62,000 isn't nothing." His jaw tightened, and his eyes glinted with something I couldn't name. "If you need protection from me, you shouldn't marry me." Silence stretched between us, the kind that feels like standing on thin ice, knowing one wrong step will send you through. I counted my breaths to keep from breaking. 4 years together, 1 year engaged, and it all came down to this. Finally, I said the only words that came. "I see." His shoulders dropped, and for a moment, smugness flickered across his face like he believed he had won. But in that pause, my resolve took root. That night, after he went upstairs, I sat at my desk in the glow of a single lamp. My hands trembled, but my thoughts were steady. I opened my email and typed to every guest, every family member, every vendor. I explained that the wedding was canceled, that Adrian was right. If I needed a prenup, I shouldn't marry him. I told them I had realized it too late, but not too late to stop myself from making a mistake. My thumb hovered for a moment, then I pressed send. 200 people received the message. My phone lit up instantly, buzzing like a trapped bee on the desk. Messages pouring in so fast I couldn't read them. Friends asking if I was serious, cousins demanding explanations, colleagues offering concern. I set it aside, turned the screen face down, and sat back in my chair with my heart thundering. When I stepped back into the living room, Adrian was on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up. "Did you make your calls?" "I did," I answered, voice calm. "Good," he said, nodding. "I knew you'd come around." I went upstairs, packed a small bag, and as I closed the door behind me, his voice called after me. "Leave the prenup on the counter. I want to burn it. Symbolic, you know. A fresh start." I left it there, but not for the reason he thought. As the elevator descended, I whispered to myself, "Not a fresh start, Adrian. An ending." By the time the sun rose, I was at Jerome's apartment. My phone buzzed with 73 missed calls, dozens of voicemails, and a flood of messages on every app I used. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Adrian's face, that self-satisfied smile when he believed I had bent. He still didn't know. Not yet. Jerome poured me coffee, the smell filling his small kitchen like an anchor. "Jennifer," he said slowly, "did you really cancel your wedding with a mass text?" I nodded, my throat tight. Adrian told me to sign away my rights without a lawyer 3 days before the wedding. What was I supposed to do? Jerome pressed his lips together, concern clouding his eyes. Maybe talk to him. I set the mug down harder than I meant to. He gave me an ultimatum. Sign or no wedding. I chose no wedding. Before Jerome could reply, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Adrian. He's called me 12 times since last night. Don't answer, I whispered. By noon, the texts began. Adrian's words scrolled across my phone like shouts in digital ink. What the hell did you do? This isn't funny. My parents are at the venue. Staff says you canceled everything. Answer me now. You can't do this to me. I typed back once my fingers steady. You said I had to choose between the prenup and the wedding. I chose. Then I blocked his number. I thought the worst was over, but that was only the beginning. Cutting off Adrian didn't bring peace. It opened the door to his family. Within hours, Greta left a voicemail, her voice trembling with rage. You pathetic little woman! How dare you humiliate my son like this? He gave you 4 years of his life, and you destroyed him over money. You'll regret this. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of monster you are. I sat in Jerome's apartment phone pressed to my ear, listening to the venom of a woman who had once smiled at me across dinner tables. Not long after Lucinda's text arrived. Jennifer, what you've done is unforgivable. Adrian hasn't stopped crying. The vendors are demanding payment. The venue won't refund us. Our cousin flew in from Portugal for nothing. Either marry him tomorrow or pay for everything. My throat closed as I stared at her words. Us, I thought bitterly. I had paid for everything. Every invoice, every check, every wire transfer bore my name. Adrian's family had contributed nothing but demands. And then came Hendrik, his father, with a carefully worded email. Jennifer, I am deeply disappointed. Adrian tells me you chose your business over him. No company is worth losing a man who truly loves you. Reconsider before it's too late. The absurdity of it all nearly made me laugh. But I didn't. Instead, I sat in Jerome's dimly lit living room, feeling the weight of what I had unleashed. I had chosen dignity, and in doing so, I had drawn the full force of their scorn. I thought the silence that followed would bring relief. Instead, it felt like the hush before a storm. And deep down, I knew the storm was already gathering. By the second night at Jerome's apartment, exhaustion settled into my bones like a second skin. I sat curled on his couch, the blinds drawn tight, while the glow from my phone lit the room in uneasy flashes. Every few minutes, another message appeared, voicemails filled with Greta's fury, Lucinda's guilt-soaked accusations, and Hendrik's measured disappointment. Each voice carried a different weapon, but together they pressed against me with the same weight, shame, blame, and control. At first, I tried to ignore them, setting my phone face down on the cushion, but silence was worse than sound. My imagination filled the gaps with their faces, their sharp words, the way Greta's eyes had once looked kindly at me across her dining table before turning into knives. When I gave in and pressed play, the venom poured out again. Greta's voice cracked with rage as she threatened to drag my name through the mud. Lucinda wrote paragraph after paragraph, weaving guilt into demands I either marry Adrian or pay back the cost of flights and deposits. And Hendrik's polished tone, so calm and deliberate, warned that people already whispered about me that my business would crumble under the weight of my instability. The strangest part was how quickly it all shifted. For 4 years, I had been welcomed into their home with smiles included in birthdays and holidays toasted at family dinners. But the moment I refused Adrian's ultimatum, all of that vanished, replaced by a campaign to break me down. I replayed the voicemails until my stomach twisted, listening for some trace of the affection I thought had been real. There was none. I found myself staring at the prenup draft saved on my laptop, the clauses so plain and reasonable, yet treated as if they were weapons. I remembered Adrian's sneer when he called my company precious, as though the nights I spent on warehouse floors, the contracts I negotiated through tears and persistence, meant nothing compared to his need for control. My chest tightened with a different kind of ache, not heartbreak, but recognition. He had never wanted a partner standing beside him. He had wanted someone who would fold under pressure, who would give piece after piece of herself until there was nothing left. At 2 a.m, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop again. My fingers hovered over the keys while the apartment hummed with Jerome's quiet breathing from the next room. I pulled up Adrian's messages, the ones where he demanded I void the prenup and my own reply refusing him. I took screenshots, lined them up neatly, and composed a message. When someone gives you an ultimatum days before your wedding, believe them. They are showing you who they are. I chose to believe Adrian. I sent it to everyone who had filled my inbox with accusations. The silence that followed was heavier than the flood of messages before. For a few hours, no one replied, and I realized that silence could be more dangerous than words. It meant they were regrouping. By morning, the attacks returned sharper this time. Greta had taken to social media, posting a photo of Adrian in his tuxedo fitting with a caption about a mother's broken heart. Within minutes, her friends chimed in with pity and condemnation, branding me ungrateful, selfish, heartless. Each comment was a small dagger cutting at my reputation. Meanwhile, the vendors I had hired began circling, demanding payment in full despite cancellations. The florist sent a curt email insisting her arrangements were already prepared. The venue's lawyer forwarded a contract clause highlighting the $15,000 non-refundable deposit in bold. The bills stacked higher receipts marked with my name alone. Adrian hadn't paid a cent. That night, Jerome poured me a glass of wine while I spread the invoices across his kitchen table, each one a reminder of how thoroughly I had been cornered. "They're turning everyone against me," I whispered. And I'm the one footing the entire wedding. Then show them the truth. Jerome set his jaw tight. So I did. I attached Adrian's text and my refusal to another group message. I wrote simply, "This is what really happened." Adrian gave me an ultimatum: void the prenup or no wedding. I chose no wedding. My finger hovered only a moment before I pressed send. The responses trickled in slowly this time. Some were shocked, others apologized, and a few grew angry that I had aired private matters. But at least now the truth had a pulse. Still, even with proof sent out, the weight didn't lift. Lying awake on Jerome's couch, I stared at the ceiling and felt the silence pressing down again. Adrian's family wasn't done, not by a long shot. By the next afternoon, Lucinda texted again, her tone shifting between guilt and demand. "You're destroying our family's reputation," Adrian cried in front of Dad. "Fix this, Jennifer. Apologize, marry him tomorrow, and save us all from this shame." Minutes later, Greta's voice message arrived, shrill and venomous. "You think your little business makes you untouchable? We will ruin your name until you have nothing left. You'll beg for forgiveness. I saved them all, every message, every threat." My phone filled with their words, a catalog of what love in their family truly meant: control, intimidation, and obedience. That evening, Hendrik sent another email, this one colder than before. I spoke to several of my colleagues. "Word is already spreading about your erratic behavior. If you think this won't affect your business, you are naive. People don't trust women who can't manage their personal lives." I slammed my laptop shut, bile rising in my throat. "They're trying to ruin me," I whispered when Jerome appeared in the doorway. My voice broke as I met his eyes. Not just personally, but professionally. "They want to destroy everything I've worked for." Jerome's expression hardened. "Then you have to be ready for their next move. They're not stopping." And he was right, because only an hour later, my phone buzzed with a new message from Greta. Her words made my stomach twist as I read them aloud. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. The club. He'll be there. You'll see what love looks like when it refuses to give up. Don't run, Jennifer. Everyone will be watching." I dropped the phone onto the table, my hands trembling. Jerome's eyes narrowed. The country club. She means the wedding day. I nodded, numb. Adrian wasn't finished. He was planning something. The room fell into silence, heavy and suffocating. Deep down, I already knew Greta was right about one thing: Adrian wasn't finished with me yet. Sunday morning arrived without flowers, without stylists, without the champagne I had once imagined. The city outside Jerome's apartment was muted, the streets quiet, as if the world had decided to keep its distance from my unraveling. I sat at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold, staring at the surface, as if the steam might rise again if I wished hard enough. Jerome tried to cut through the silence with a light comment about golf, how it distracted from heartbreak, but even his humor had an edge of concern. By noon, we were driving past the manicured lawns of the country club, its white columns and polished floors looking more like a stage than a sanctuary. I hadn't stepped foot there since childhood, and the familiar smell of lemon oil and cut grass struck me as almost cruel. Jerome guided us to the third hole, the clink of his clubs a rhythm against the hush of the day. For a moment, the ordinary motion of swinging and watching a ball arc against the sky steadied my breathing. The illusion broke when a shadow stretched across our cart. A man in a blazer shifted awkwardly, clearing his throat. "Ms. Hagen, there's a situation at the clubhouse," he said, his voice low. Confused, I asked what kind of situation, and his eyes dropped before he answered. "Your fiancé is here." "Well, your ex-fiancé. He's insisting on seeing you." Jerome's head turned sharply toward me, disbelief flashing across his face. "You've got to be kidding." But as we rolled back toward the clubhouse, a sick certainty settled in my stomach. When the building came into view, my breath caught. Adrian stood in the lobby dressed in a full tuxedo, as if the day had never changed. A bow tie, a white boutonniere pinned precisely, and a bouquet of roses clutched tightly in his hands. His hair was slicked back, his smile strained, and his eyes carried the brightness of a man stepping into a performance. Every pair of eyes in the room fixed on him, the golfers pausing mid-swing waitstaff frozen with trays, mid-air couples murmuring at tables. When he spotted me, his face lit up with a triumphant kind of relief.
"Jennifer, there you are,"
he said, his voice pitched louder than the quiet room required.
"We're getting married today."
I stopped just inside the doorway, my hands tightening around the strap of my bag. "No, Adrian," I said evenly. "We are not." He stepped forward, holding out the bouquet as if it were proof of his sincerity. "I forgive you," he said, trembling, but smiling, his words echoing across the space. The tantrum, the panic, all of it. "We can still fix this. The photographer's waiting at the beach. Just you and me." Jerome muttered under his breath, but I didn't move. My throat felt tight, yet my words came clear. "There is no ceremony. There is no wedding. It's over." Adrian's smile faltered, but he forced it back, his eyes glistening. "Fine," he said quickly. "I'll sign the prenup. You win. Just come with me and we'll print another copy." My chest rose and fell as I steadied myself. It's not about winning. It's about trust. Why would I marry someone who threatened to walk away unless I signed away my rights 3 days before the wedding? His face broke the charm, shattering into fury.
"You're ruining my life,"
he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation.
"Everyone thinks I'm a fool, a gold digger, a joke. You did this to me."
I lifted my chin, letting my voice carry through the silence. "No, Adrian. You did this when you tried to force me into signing away my protection. You turned love into leverage." The bouquet slipped from his hands, roses scattering across the polished floor, like fallen pieces of the illusion. His shoulders shook, the anger draining into sobs as his voice collapsed. "Please, Jennifer, don't leave me like this." For a moment, I saw him as I once had, hopeful, vulnerable, convincing. But it wasn't enough anymore. The weight I had carried for days lifted as I stood still, steady, in the face of his pleading. Jerome stepped closer, but the club manager was already at Adrian's side with 2 security guards.
"Sir, you need to leave," the manager
said gently, though firmly. Adrian's head whipped around wild, searching for someone to side with him. "No, she's my bride. She loves me. Tell them, Jennifer. Tell them." I met his gaze one last time.
"No, Adrian, I don't."
The guards guided him toward the door as his voice echoed through the lobby, breaking into cries that grew fainter with each step. When the doors closed behind him, the hush returned heavier than before. But then the whispers started again, soft, uncertain, from strangers who had seen everything. "Did you hear that?" a man murmured from behind a menu. He tried to force her to sign away her rights. Another woman whispered, "Good for her. Took courage to walk away." I stood there, the echo of their words swirling around me. Adrian would always be remembered in those halls as the man who arrived in a tuxedo to beg for a wedding that no longer existed. And me, I was the woman who said no. For the first time in days, I could breathe. Yet as I stepped outside into the cool air, the relief was tempered by a lingering truth. Adrian's public collapse had shifted the story, but his family would not let this end quietly. And I knew, as the weight settled back onto my shoulders, that their fight was only beginning. Monday morning crept in with the gray light of a storm that never broke. I unlocked the office early, desperate for the steady comfort of contracts and schedules, the small rituals that once felt unshakable. Dorothy was already there, her coat still draped across the back of her chair, lips pressed thin. She didn't waste time on greetings. "Jennifer," she said, her voice clipped. "We've got a problem." My stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" She turned her screen toward me, the glare from her inbox sharp against her glasses. Dozens of emails lined up subject lines repeating the same words: cancellation, postponement, reconsideration. Names I had built relationships with for years now looked at me with suspicion. "They're pulling contracts," Dorothy explained, her voice low with both fury and disbelief. "Adrian's father has been calling clients directly, telling them you had a breakdown and abandoned his son at the altar. He's painting you as unstable, dangerous." The words hit harder than any voicemail Greta had left. This wasn't just gossip at a dinner table anymore. This was sabotage. I sank into my chair, fingers gripping the edge of the desk. "He's trying to ruin me. You won't let him," Dorothy said sharply, her tone cutting through my panic. "But we need to respond fast." For the first time in days, tears didn't come. Instead, something inside me hardened. I pulled out my phone, opened LinkedIn, and began typing. My pulse thudded with each word. "To those concerned about my supposed breakdown this weekend, I'm fine. I simply chose not to marry someone who demanded I sign legal documents without counsel as proof of love. In business and in life, anyone who says, 'Sign this now without your lawyer,' is someone you should run from." The $62,000 lost in deposits is nothing compared to the cost of marrying the wrong person. Sometimes the best deals are the ones you walk away from. I read it once more, then pressed post. The knot in my chest tightened, waiting for the backlash. But within an hour, notifications flooded in, business owners applauding colleagues, calling me brave. Even strangers sharing their own stories of walking away from coercion. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't the villain in Adrian's story. I was a woman who refused to bend. At noon, Dorothy's phone rang. She answered on speaker, her face impassive. Hendrik's voice boomed through the line, controlled but seething. "Your partner is destroying my son's reputation. Do you understand the damage she's caused? Do you know what people are saying about our family?" Dorothy leaned back, eyes steady. "Sir, with all due respect, your son destroyed his own reputation when he demanded Jennifer sign away her rights without legal representation. That's called coercion. She was smart to walk away." The silence on the other end stretched long before Hendrik sputtered. "She humiliated him." "No," Dorothy said evenly, he humiliated himself. "Now if you'll excuse me, we have work to do." She ended the call without waiting for his reply. For a moment, the quiet that followed was almost sweet. That afternoon, I agreed to meet Karina, one of Adrian's friends, at a quiet cafe on the east side of town. She had always seemed reasonable, the kind of person who smoothed over drama with gentle words. She sat across from me, her expression heavy. "Jennifer," she began. "He's not well. Adrian hasn't eaten in 3 days. He says he can't sleep. He's talking about giving up." I folded my arms, the steam from my coffee curling between us. "Karina, he posted Instagram stories from a steakhouse last night." Her cheeks flushed. "He was trying to seem okay." "What do you want from me?" I asked softly, but there was steel under my tone. "Take him back," she whispered, "or at least help pay for the wedding costs. His family spent a fortune." My patience snapped. "His family spent nothing. I paid for everything, the dress, the venue, the catering, every cent. I have the receipts." She blinked, startled. "He told us his parents covered half." "Then he lied," I said coldly. Her face hardened. "So you're just going to let him suffer? I'm going to let him face the consequences of his choices." She pushed back from the table, shaking her head.
You're heartless.
I leaned forward, my voice low.
No, I'm practical.
The same practicality he found so offensive in a prenup. She left in a rush, her chair scraping across the floor. But I didn't chase her. I sat alone, finishing my coffee, the bitterness grounding me more than any apology could. That night, Adrian took to Facebook, his words crafted like a confession. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. I thought Jennifer loved me. Instead, she loved her money more. I'm heartbroken, but grateful I learned the truth before giving her my last name. And yes, I'm keeping the ring. It's the least she owes me for 4 years of my life. The bile rose in my throat. The ring wasn't a gift. It was a promise tied to a marriage that never happened. I called my lawyer, explaining the post, my voice trembling with anger. He listened calmly, then said, "In this state, an engagement ring is a conditional gift. No marriage, no gift. Legally, it's yours.
Want me to handle it?"
"Absolutely," I answered. As I hung up, a sharp clarity settled over me. Adrian had wanted proof of my love, but what he had now was proof of something else. He couldn't twist the law any more than he could twist me. 2 weeks later, the storm quieted at the surface. Greta's threats came less frequently. Lucinda's guilt-ridden texts grew shorter, and Hendrik's polished disapproval arrived only in occasional emails. But their silence was not surrender. They had one last card to play the ring. My lawyer sent a formal demand citing the law plainly. No marriage, no ring. Adrian refused. Instead, Greta called me directly, her voice sharp as glass. "You want the ring back? After everything you put my son through, he earned that ring. He gave you 4 years of his life." I gripped the phone until my knuckles whitened. Love doesn't require ultimatums, Greta. And it doesn't require signing away your future to prove devotion. If you want to sue me over a piece of jewelry, be my guest. But you'll lose. 2 days later, Lucinda appeared at my office without warning. She dropped a small velvet box onto my desk, her glare cutting like a knife. Inside, the ring glittered under the fluorescent light, perfect and cold. A note was taped to the lid in Greta's handwriting. "I hope this ring brings you the happiness you denied us. May every woman who sees it know it was worn by someone who truly loved you, not your money." I stared at it for a long moment, then closed the box. The next morning, I sold it back to the jeweler. $18,000 a loss of $4,000 from what Adrian had paid, but compared to the $62,000 lost in deposits and the hundreds of thousands a divorce would have cost, it felt like freedom. Still, as I left the jeweler's office with the check in my hand, I knew this wasn't over. Adrian's family had lost their ring, their wedding, and their chance to control me. And soon, they would learn what it felt like when the story no longer belonged to them. The week after the ring was returned, the storm seemed to scatter into a deceptive calm. Greta's furious calls slowed to a trickle. Lucinda's long, guilt-laden texts dwindled into silence, and Hendrik's measured disappointment arrived only in rare, carefully drafted emails. On the surface, it felt as though the fight had ended, but in my chest, I knew better. Their silence didn't mean surrender, it meant regrouping. I arrived at the office one morning to find Dorothy waiting, a file folder open on her desk. She slid it toward me without a word. Inside were printouts of posts and comments pulled from social media, each one dripping with accusation. Adrian's version of the story was spreading again, painting me as cold, greedy, and heartless. In one photo, he sat at a bar with a drink in his hand, his caption pleading for sympathy. I gave her 4 years, and she chose money instead of love. The comments beneath it were a chorus of pity for him and contempt for me. Dorothy's expression was sharp. "We can't let this stand," she said. "You told the truth once, but it's time people see what he really did. I hesitated, my hand brushing the edge of the folder. Part of me wanted to let it fade, to step away quietly, but the weight of every insult, every threat pressed against me. Adrian had made a public spectacle of my life. Greta had threatened my reputation. Hendrik had called my clients. If I stayed silent, their version would become the truth. That night, in the quiet of my living room, I opened my laptop. I gathered every screenshot, every message I had saved Adrian's demand that I void the prenup without counsel. Greta's voicemails promising to drag my name through the mud, Lucinda's texts insisting I pay for the wedding. Hendrik's emails warning that women who couldn't manage their personal lives couldn't be trusted in business. Piece by piece, I arranged them into a story. Not with bitterness, not with venom, but with clarity. When I posted it, my hands trembled. I wrote that protection was not mistrust, that a prenup was wisdom, not cruelty. I wrote that coercion, whether dressed as love or loyalty, was still coercion. And I pressed send. By morning, the post had taken on a life of its own. It spread across LinkedIn and Facebook, shared by colleagues, clients, even strangers who saw their own reflections in my words. Comments poured in from women who had faced similar ultimatums from business owners who had walked away from partners who tried to trap them with contracts or lies. Instead of being branded as heartless, I was being called brave. My story had stopped being Adrian's weapon and became my shield. Of course, Adrian's family wasn't finished. Greta called me again, her voice weary but still laced with bitterness. "You think you've won," she hissed, "but all you've done is embarrass yourself. People won't forget how you humiliated my son." I let her words settle, then replied calmly, "No, Greta, people won't forget how Adrian humiliated himself." She hung up on me, but this time the silence that followed felt different. Less threatening, more defeated. A few days later, an unexpected message arrived in my inbox. It was from Winona, a woman I hadn't spoken to in years, someone I had once dated briefly in college before our lives went in different directions. She had seen the post and wrote simply, "For what it's worth, you made the right call. Anyone who thinks a prenup is an insult isn't planning forever. They're planning to take advantage. Coffee sometime." Her words made me pause. For weeks, I had been surrounded by venom threats and shame. To see something so grounded, so clear, felt like a window opening in a stifling room. We met at a quiet cafe later that week. Winona was just as I remembered, sharp, thoughtful, with a way of cutting through noise to the truth. Over coffee, she shook her head at the madness of it all. "Protecting yourself isn't mistrust," she said firmly. "It's wisdom." For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. Meanwhile, Adrian's life began to fray in ways I hadn't expected. Mutual friends told me he was already seeing someone new, a man who owned a small restaurant in town. Within 2 weeks, Adrian had started demanding access to his accounts, insisting that trust meant sharing everything. The man threw him out on the spot. The pattern was too clear to ignore. Adrian hadn't just tried to strip me of my independence. It was who he was, and sooner or later, everyone around him would see it too. Greta and Hendrik continued to threaten legal action, their final attempt to claw something back. They claimed I owed them reimbursement for relatives' flights and hotel rooms, a sum of $3,000. My lawyer almost laughed when I told him. "Let them file," he said. "They'll embarrass themselves in court long before they embarrass you." For the first time, I believed him. In the evenings, I found myself quieter, sitting at my desk, with the ring money tucked away, the invoices paid, the losses tallied. I had lost a wedding, a family I thought I might join, and friends who showed where their loyalties lay. But I had gained something I hadn't realized I had been missing: clarity. Clarity about what love is and what it is not. Love does not demand proof in the form of signatures. Love does not ask you to burn your own future to show devotion. Love stands beside you steady and equal. And as I looked at the path ahead, I knew Adrian and his family were no longer mine to fight. The story now belonged to me. Still, I also knew storms don't vanish overnight. Their voices might grow quieter, their reach shorter, but people like them rarely walk away willingly. And I had the uneasy sense that one last confrontation was still waiting for me just beyond the horizon. 2 weeks after selling the ring, I thought the worst had passed. My work was steady again, my clients reassured, and the noise from Adrian's family had dulled into little more than background static. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, I walked into the office and found Dorothy already on the phone, her pen tapping a sharp rhythm against her notepad. When she hung up, her expression told me something had shifted. "That was the club manager," she said. "Adrian's family tried to book the ballroom again. They wanted to host a dinner, and they asked if they could put the bill in your company's name." I felt heat rise in my chest. After everything, Dorothy shook her head, lips tight. "They don't want reconciliation, Jennifer. They want revenge. But the good news is, he told them no." That same afternoon, a colleague forwarded me screenshots of a private Facebook group where Greta had posted a long message about me. She called me vindictive, claimed I had ruined Adrian's career, and accused me of using the prenup as an excuse to humiliate him publicly. My name was there for hundreds of strangers to pick apart. For a moment, I sat frozen, staring at her words until the tension inside me finally cracked. I opened my laptop, pulled up the messages again. The ultimatum, the threats, the evidence I had carefully saved. This time, I didn't just send it quietly to friends or colleagues. I shared it publicly, attaching every screenshot with dates and context. I wrote, "If you hear a story about me, here are the facts." Adrian demanded I void our prenup without counsel 3 days before the wedding. His family threatened me, my business, and my name when I refused. Love is not leverage, and protection is not mistrust. The post spread faster than I expected. Within hours, other women added their stories beneath mine. Stories of ultimatums, manipulation, and the quiet fear of being asked to surrender too much in the name of love. For every cruel comment Greta's friends left, 5 more appeared in my defense. The tide had shifted, and for once, it wasn't me standing alone against their voices. Adrian's family must have felt it too, because that night my phone rang again. This time, it was Hendrik, his tone no longer polished but edged with panic. "Do you understand what you've done? You've destroyed our reputation. Clients won't meet with me. Our friends are whispering. You've made us a spectacle." I listened quietly before answering. "You did that when you tried to ruin me." "I only told the truth." He hung up without another word. The following weekend, I ran into Adrian by chance at a cafe near the waterfront. He looked thinner, his suit a little rumpled, his charm dulled at the edges. When he spotted me, his smile flickered weakly like he was searching for the right mask and couldn't find it. He walked over, setting his coffee down with unsteady hands. "Jennifer," he began, his voice low. "We could fix this. We could say the prenup thing was a misunderstanding. People would believe it if you—" I cut him off, my voice, calm but firm. "No, Adrian, I won't rewrite the truth for you." His eyes darted toward the window away from me before he muttered, "You've ruined me." I leaned back in my chair. "No, Adrian, you ruined yourself when you tried to use love as a contract. I just stopped playing along." He left without finishing his coffee, and I watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of sorrow and release. By Monday, word of my public post had reached even the most stubborn corners. The florist who had once demanded payment sent me a quiet note of apology. A client who had hesitated to renew a contract called to say she admired my strength. Even employees at the club whispered support when I passed by. Adrian's family, once loud and relentless, had been reduced to silence in places they once commanded. Dorothy stopped by my office late that week carrying 2 cups of tea. She set one on my desk and smiled the first real smile I had seen from her in weeks. "You know," she said, "for all the chaos, you've turned this into something bigger than them. You've taken the narrative away, and they can't get it back." Her words lingered with me long after she left. For months, I had been reacting to every blow, every message, every threat. But now, for the first time, I had shifted the ground beneath them. Adrian and his family could no longer control the story. Still, even as I savored that quiet victory, I knew one thing with certainty. People like Greta and Hendrik didn't accept defeat gracefully. They would keep trying to claw back what they thought they had lost, and I had to be ready for the day their silence broke again. The calm that followed was different this time. Not the stillness of fear, but the steady quiet that comes when a storm has passed, yet left clouds heavy on the horizon. I had reclaimed my voice, but the final reckoning was still to come. The weeks that followed carried a strange stillness, as though the noise that once filled every corner of my life had finally run out of breath. Adrian disappeared from public view, and his family's voices, once so sharp and relentless, faded into a silence they could no longer control. The very people who tried to shame me had instead been left with their own humiliation, whispered about in country club dining rooms and polite circles where appearances once meant everything to them. At work, the tide turned in my favor. Clients who had hesitated began calling again, some quietly admitting they admired my strength, others saying my story made them reevaluate their own partnerships. Dorothy and I found ourselves busier than ever, rebuilding the momentum that had been shaken, but not broken. The business I had fought to protect stood firm proof that truth can survive even the ugliest storm. On quieter days, I sat with Winona over coffee, the comfort of her presence reminding me that not every voice in my past was critical or cruel. She asked nothing of me, offered no ultimatums, only conversation and clarity. Her reminder that protecting yourself is wisdom stayed with me, and I carried it like a touchstone through each new decision. Adrian, I later heard, tried repeating the same patterns with someone else, only to be rejected when his demands became too familiar. It gave me no joy to know he failed again, only a sober recognition that some people cannot change until they lose everything. His family, too, withdrew into the background, their threats never turning into lawsuits, their fury dissolving into embarrassment. Justice didn't arrive in a courtroom or through a dramatic confrontation. It came quietly through truth made visible and dignity preserved. I lost money, yes, and people I once thought of as family. I lost the dream of a wedding day I had planned down to the last detail. But what I gained mattered far more. I gained the strength to stand on my own, the courage to walk away, when love turned into leverage, and the clarity to see manipulation for what it was. Now, when I look back, the lesson feels simple, though it was hard-earned. Love does not demand you sign away your rights. It does not call protection an insult or ask you to prove devotion by surrendering yourself. Real love stands beside you, steady and equal. And so I reclaimed my dignity, not with anger or revenge, but with the quiet certainty that no one can take what you refuse to give. The story ended not with their triumph, but with my freedom. Before we close, I'd love to know, have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between peace and self-respect? Share your thoughts if you feel comfortable, and thank you for listening to my story.